Hi, John Herman here with a continuation of our study of Martin Luther. Today we're going to focus more on his personal life so we can get a better picture of the total package. Let's start with his appearance and personality. Luther was an imposing-looking individual. He had a stout build, short neck, double chin, and piercing eyes. His appearance gave one the impression that you did not mess with him. It also showed that he did not fit the mold for monastic asceticism. He liked his beer and food, my kind of guy, and didn't try to hide the fact. If nothing else, you could say that he was not a phony. What you saw was what you got. As we have seen, he often responded to opponents in a combative fashion, using extremely harsh language. He would often tell people that they should tell the devil that he may kiss my ass. His preaching and writing were often totally without tact. While this offended some, it endeared him all the more to others. He was very open with his emotions and frustrations. Once, when asked if he truly loved God, he replied, "Love God? Sometimes I hate him." Luther never wanted to start another church body. What he wanted was to reform the existing church so that it adhered to the theology of St. Paul with regards to justification. When his followers began to use his name to identify themselves, he pleaded with them not to do this. He wrote, "Let us abolish all party names and call ourselves Christians after him whose teaching we hold." Throughout his life, he maintained an overwhelming workload that included writing, teaching, organizing the new church, and being a good husband and father. So, with that as a lead-in, let's talk about the subject of marriage. Luther had long condemned the principle of celibacy for the priesthood. As usual, he cited biblical reasons. He believed that vows of celibacy denied human nature and led the religious astray. Need I remind you of the ongoing sex scandals that have rocked the Catholic Church? Nothing new under the sun here. He believed that marriage was a God-ordained institution that allowed people to live more fully and honestly in the ways that they were made. However, he had no inkling to marry. He wrote a friend in 1524, "I shall never take a wife as I feel at present. Not that I am insensible to my flesh or sex, for I am neither wood nor stone, but my mind is adverse to wedlock because I daily expect the death of a heretic." But then, just 1 year later, he found himself engaged. He wrote to another friend, "Suddenly, and while I was occupied with far different thoughts, the Lord has plunged me into marriage." So he blamed it on God. Okay. The bride was a nun. Some predicted that the union of a monk and a nun would produce at least a two-headed monster, and at the most, the Antichrist himself. Neither happened. The bride was Katrina von Bora. She was 26, he was 41. Katie, as Luther called her, had become a nun at age 16, but after 10 years, she became disillusioned and became inspired by Luther's teachings. She conspired with several other nuns to escape and contacted Luther to see if he could help. Now, I'm not sure if openly leaving a convent was an option, but for some reason, the nuns did not want to confront their superiors. In any case, even though it was a capital offense to liberate a nun, Luther devised a clever plan. He arranged to have Katie and 11 others hidden in empty herring barrels by the man who delivered fish to the cloister. The man took them to Wittenberg, where a local remarked, A wagon load of Vestal virgins has just come to town, all more eager for marriage than life. Luther found husbands for most, but Katie was a problem. She was a feisty redhead far beyond the usual age for marriage. He did find an older man, but she wasn't interested. She wanted Luther himself. At first he declined, saying, "Good heavens, they couldn't give me a wife." His parents tried to talk him into it, but his friends were shocked at the thought. Finally he agreed, because there was a battery of reasons in favor of his proposal. His marriage would please his father, rile the Pope, cause the angels to laugh and the devil to weep. His close friend Philip Melanchthon had hopes that, in quotes, "this state of life may sober him down, so that he will discard the low buffoonery that we have often censored." Didn't happen. The couple were engaged and wed on the same day, 2 years after Katie's escape. As a wedding gift, a new local elector named John the Steadfast gave them a former monastery near Wittenberg, where Luther had lived before the Reformation. Not a bad gift. Katie indeed set about to bring order to his chaotic affairs. He had been a bachelor for a long time, and he himself noted that, "Before I was married, the bed had not been made for a whole year and became foul with sweat." Like I said, he told it like it was. It is not known whether the sheets were cleaned or burned. Katie was a jack of all trades, thanks to the training she received at the convent. As soon as they moved into their new home, she took the reins on managing the household. Luther was clueless. An observer noted, "The Luther home usually overflowed with a motley crowd of boys, students, girls, widows, old women, and youngsters. For this reason, there is much disturbance in the place." For a while, one of Katie's relatives also lived with them, along with 6 of Luther's sister's children. Katie served as Luther's publishing agent, a personal secretary who scheduled visits and meetings, the real estate agent who oversaw the stream of guests and boarders, a nurse who tended to the family's many illnesses, a cook, livestock supervisor, which included slaughtering animals, by the way, a beer maker, oh yes, herbalist, and gardener. She regularly managed the child rearing alone while he was away. They had 6 children of their own and adopted 4 more orphans. It is said she did the whole thing with skill and patience. Luther called her the morning star of Wittenberg because of her tendency to get up before dawn to begin her chores. Finances were a perpetual worry. It is said that one thing they quarreled about in their marriage was money. He liked to spend it, she liked to save. But more accurately, though, was the fact that Luther was not a spendthrift. He liked giving things away to those in need. She was the family business manager, and sometimes things were tight. Their monastery turned home had many small rooms. To bring in extra income, she would rent the rooms to her boarders. Luther was inclined to let them stay for free. Luther wryly called his wife "my Lord Kate," since she frequently had to take matters into her own hands. He remarked, "At home I have good wine and beer, and a beautiful wife, or shall I say, Lord." The Luthers were married for 20 years until Luther's passing in 1546. His writings reflect his devotion to her. In one letter he wrote, "Katie, you have married an honest man who loves you. You are an empress. He once chided himself for giving more credit to Catherine than to Christ, who has done so much for me. Regarding marriage in general, he said, "There is no more lovely, friendly, and charming relationship, communion, or company than a good marriage." He got that one right. A few thought questions can be raised regarding their marriage, and I'll just present them. You can think about them later. While their marriage ended in great affection and love, the two did not exhibit popular images of romantic love when they first wed. What can couples learn today from their commitment to each other and their family? Another, Luther and Katie often entertained and housed guests and students, yet struggled to make ends meet. What do they teach us about hospitality? Now, let's talk a little bit about Luther the father. About a year after getting married, they were presented with a baby boy who was a source of great happiness. He wrote, "Hans is cutting his teeth and making a joyous nuisance of himself. These are the joys of marriage, of which the Pope is not worthy." He and Katie had 6 children of their own and adopted 4 more. Of their natural children, as we said, 2 died prematurely. Elizabeth died after 8 weeks, and Magdalena died in his arms at age 14 after a brief illness. That one really upset him. A friend later wrote, who observed Luther. Later, when she was lying in bed, meaning the daughter, he said to his daughter, "Magdalena, little daughter, you would gladly remain here with me, your father. Are you also glad to go to your father in heaven?" The sick girl replied, "Yes, dear father, as God wills." The father said, after turning away from her, "In the last 1,000 years, God has given to no bishop such great gifts as he has given to me. I am angry with myself that I am unable to rejoice from my heart and be thankful to God, although at times I do sing a little hymn and thank God. Whether we live or die, we are the Lord's." He turned to his wife and comforted her. "Remember where she is going. It will be well with her. The flesh dies, but the spirit lives. Children do not argue. They believe what they are told. To children, everything is plain. They die without anxiety, without complaint, without fear of death." As she was dying, he fell to his knees before the bed and wept bitterly. She died in the arms of her father. As traumatic as that incident was, there was a silver lining. Because of his real-life experience, he was able to empathize with others going through similar grief. He wrote many pastoral letters to people in need, including those who had lost loved ones. Now, these were personal letters. This isn't like a book. He was sort of a 16th century Stephen's minister, is what went through my mind. In his counseling to the bereaved, there was, however, a common theme in his writings, and there were actually 5 themes. Number 1, God, who knows better than we do, has taken the loved one. Number 2, God created us as feeling, loving creatures who will naturally grieve over a loss. Number 3, God, Christ, and the Word are the best consolers. Number 4, a faithful death is better than a miserable life. Number 5, there is need for moderation in grief. For his entire life, Luther was committed to prayer. He said, "I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer." He also said that to be a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing. His last 3 or so years were plagued with declining health, although he had not been exactly the perfect specimen for much of his life. He had dizzy spells, hearing loss, fainting spells, a cataract, kidney stones, arthritis, a ruptured eardrum, angina, gout, insomnia, hemorrhoids, and constipation. As we said last week, some of these may have been contributed to his short temper and even harsher writings, especially towards the end. That's what his wife thought, anyway. But he kept at his duties as long as he could. His last sermon was preached only 3 days before his death. He made the comment that, "When I die, I want to be a ghost, so I can continue to pester the bishops, priests, and godless monks until they have more trouble with the dead Luther than they could ever have had with 1,000 living ones." The man was always thinking. At that point, though, even with his poor health and it being in the dead of winter, he set off to his hometown of Eisleben. A dispute had arisen between the Mansfield counts, who were nobility from the city of Mansfield, and Luther's siblings regarding the control of their father's mining business. Luther needed to be there to negotiate a settlement. He had already been involved several years ago, so he was the man that had to continue the act. The negotiations were successful, but immediately after, he started experiencing chest pains and didn't have the strength to return to Wittenberg. Within a day, on February 18th, 1546, at age 62, he died. On his deathbed, he prayed, "Into your hands I commend my spirit. You have saved me, Father, you faithful God." His remains are still located in the Castle Church in Wittenberg, beneath the pulpit. After his death, Katie grieved. For who would not be sad and afflicted by the loss of such a precious man as my dear Lord was? He did great things not just for a city or a single land, but for the whole world. Therefore I am truly so deeply grieved that I cannot eat or drink, nor can I sleep. And if I had a principality or an empire and lost it, it would not have been painful as is now that my dear Lord God has taken him from this precious and beloved man from me, and not from me alone, but for the whole world. After Luther's death, she remained in Wittenberg until the plague hit, and she was forced to flee. She died from injuries sustained from a wagon accident in 1552, about 6 years after her husband's death. So I'm going to end here. I hope I have left you with a feeling and understanding of the real Luther. Many of his remarks, especially taken out of context, alienated some, but apparently he was heard loudly and clearly by the Catholic Church. In 1567, Pope Pius V canceled the sale of all indulgences. They were and still are offered, but not for a fee. The recipient must still do something, such as saying specified prayers, visiting particular religious places, or the performance of good works, which can include monetary contributions to charities. Now, I'm going to try one more time to have a Zoom meeting this evening at 7 p.m. Last week's, unfortunately, was a bust, and I really have no idea why it didn't work. I apologize for that. Next week, I plan to explore Luther's feelings about politics, social justice, and capitalism. Should be interesting. I end with an often quoted statement of Luther. Let the wife make the husband glad to come home, and let him make her sorry to see him leave.